Hello, my name is Karen Gauthier, Nemertes Director of Business Operations, and welcome to our monthly webinar entitled Out of the Lab, Emerging Technologies That Will Rock Our World, by our CEO and founder, Johna Johnson. This webinar consists of an interactive presentation and moderated Q&A period. To submit a question, please use the control panel on GoToWebinar. If you experience any technical difficulties, please contact webinars@nemertes.com. Upon conclusion of the webinar, you will be presented with a short survey. Please answer the questions to provide feedback on this webinar and content for future webinars. We also ask if you would like to participate in our research. In exchange for your participation, you'll receive access to the key findings of the research. A replay of this webinar will soon be available for viewing on our website. I'm going to go ahead and get started, and I'm going to turn everything over to Johna Johnson. Hi, Johna.
Great. Thank you, Karen, and welcome, everybody. Good afternoon for those of us on the East Coast, and good morning to anyone that's on the West Coast. And anyone that's global, well, happy Thursday. Karen, can you go to the next slide? Okay. This is what we're going to cover today. I'll give you a brief description about Nemertes. I think most of you are familiar with us. And then we'll talk about some coming attractions that are going to be available to our clients and others starting next month, that is in June, although we have special previews here on this presentation for you. We'll talk a little bit about Navigator 360, and then we'll go into some of the areas of emerging technology that we're going to focus on. That includes the physical world, IoT, microservices and containers, DevOps and adjacent technologies, some cool technology in the security space, some cool technology in the immersive group collaboration space, and then some guidance on how to get more information, an update on our next webinar, and we'll jump right into Q&A. However, as Karen mentioned, you don't have to wait till the Q&A to submit your questions. Please, folks are familiar with how webinars work. Please just go ahead and submit a question, and Karen will pull them together and fire them at me at the end of this presentation. Next slide, Karen. Okay, this is about Nemertes. I think most of you are familiar with this, but for those who aren't, we were founded in 2002 by IT professionals for IT professionals. I was, at the time, my last job before I founded the company was Chief Technology Officer for a global consulting and engineering firm. That meant it was my responsibility to figure out, in the words of Wayne Gretzky, where the puck was going to be, and figure out where our engineers needed to be up to speed before our clients needed to be up to speed. And we had some world-class clients. We built, infrastructure and security for some of the largest enterprises and carriers in the world. And I'm telling you this because I got increasingly frustrated in that role because nobody, to my mind, was looking far enough out to be able to give me the guidance on emerging technologies, and in particular on the business impact of emerging technologies that I needed to make decisions in the here and now. So I reached out to a partner, we founded Nemertes, and that's what we do. We've spent a lot of time over the years focusing on the business impact. We do lots of fun cost analysis, cost modeling, true cost of operations, business value analysis, great stuff. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about the other side of that mission, which is the emerging technologies side. So with that, next slide, please. So we're going to highlight some coming attractions. And very specifically, we have 4 key things that I want to talk about. The way to look at this slide is the stuff that comes from out of the lab is the farthest out. That's why it's the upper right-hand corner. This is technology that isn't going to be actionable for those of you who are in the IT or vendor space today, but is going to be within the next couple of years. Forerunner Technologies are out now, getting prototyped, getting tested, and very likely and very possibly changing the way you're doing business today, but have not yet become mainstream. Friday Finds is actually an informal series, and we'll talk about this, of cool, interesting, emerging technology companies that are generally early-stage startups, just got some funding, or maybe even pre-major funding, angel funding, that we at Nemertes think are interesting enough to call them to your attention. And finally, I'm going to talk about our futuring Birds of a Feather session, which is happening next month. Next slide, please. So first and foremost, let's talk about out of the lab. This is currently a Nemertes column featuring research and researchers with the ability to affect the IT industry. We have a number of blog posts, and we'll show you some examples. In June, this is going to be its own section on our site that you'll be able to hit on a regular basis, and we will alert you on a regular basis to when we're adding content to that. It really highlights both as I said, the research and the researchers, so what's motivating that person, why they're actually doing that particular area of research. When it says time frame next 5 years, we're carefully selecting and curating research that is going to have an impact within the next 5 years. So it's not so far out that, you know, it's for your children or your grandchildren to see the impact, but it's not productized or available or even commercialized in any fashion today. The research areas are selected by Nemertes based on why we think these are important, and we'll explain that in the section, you know, in the more formal section that we'll be rolling out next month. Why it matters? Because many of you are involved in strategic planning for your organizations, and you need to know what's coming down the pike so you can build it into your roadmap. How to follow it? Follow us on Twitter, follow me personally, follow Nemertes, follow both of us, hit the site, and if you want to submit ideas, please don't use Twitter because I don't really use Twitter for submitting ideas, but send something to research@nemertes.com or to me personally. Either one will work. Thanks. Next. Forerunner Technologies. These are technologies, we already have a space on the site carved out for this, and our clients will begin seeing a rollout of research as our research projects from the first half of the year begin to get published. In the second half of the year, you're going to see this space filling up big time. What this is leading edge technologies that are nearer to reality than the out of the lab stuff. It's commercial. So as you can see, quantum computing, blockchain, IoT, people are deploying this stuff in the here and now, but we haven't even begun to see how that's going to really change everything that we're doing. And these are all examples. You know, you can read the list. I'm not going to read the list to you, but these are all examples of things that are really going to change your job within the next 5 years and change your job really within the next 3 years. So you need to be aware of them and have a strategy about probably everything on this list and then a few more. If you don't, we'll help you formulate that strategy and build that into whatever it is that you're doing, but you really need to be thinking about that now. So that's the difference between out of the lab and Forerunner. Out of the lab is informational. You can put it on your strategic planning. For Forerunner, you really need to have an initiative and a defined set of goals around what you're doing in each of these areas. Again, follow us the same way as before. Submit ideas to research or to me. And that's our Forerunner Technologies. Next slide, please. Then there are Friday finds, and these are more informal. These are blog posts available to Nemertes clients and non-clients. Essentially, these are what we consider cool technologies, and we'll explain why they're cool, and we'll give you some examples of them. If you're a vendor, by all means, tell us what your cool technologies are. We'll certainly consider them. Really, the selection criterion here is if it's something that is game-changing compared to the current state of the area in which they're playing. And we'll give you a couple of examples, and you'll get a sense of our editorial aesthetic, to call it that. What it is not, and I need to stress this, is a recommendation that you as an IT person should go out and buy these products or buy products from this company. No. We haven't had the chance to put these through our full vetting process or conduct benchmark interviews around users or any of that. We're just saying, hey, it's interesting. If you've worked with these guys and you have any feedback to provide, please do, because that will be useful. It is not a recommendation. And the example on the right are just some key tools around DevOps, and we'll go into that in greater detail in the next couple of slides. Next slide. And finally, last but not least, at our Nemertes Navigator 360 conference, which is happening next month, we have a Birds of a Feather session on the discipline of futuring. And that is specifically understanding and interpreting trends. Leading that session is Ed Krebs. He's the former Ford Motor Company leader for IT research in emerging technology. He was responsible for the innovation project at Ford. It's very, very interesting stuff that he's done. And more importantly, Ed has great experience in how to processize the idea of creativity and imagination. And you're probably listening to me thinking, Johna, creativity and imagination is not something you can build into a process. As it turns out, you can. You can't make it perfect, and you certainly don't want to make it rote, but Ed has distilled out 8 principles of effective futuring, looking into the future and making good decisions about what's likely to happen and what's not likely to happen. And more importantly, it's not just an individual expertise, but it's actually an organizational expertise. So he's going to be running that session at Nemertes Navigator 360. If you're an IT professional and haven't signed up yet, please sign up. If you're a vendor and like to be there, please see our folks that handle sponsoring, and they will happily tell you how you can get there. But it's going to be a great conference. I'm really looking forward to it, and I'm really looking forward to this session. Also, last, before we change slides, if you can't make it, we do have a LinkedIn group. It's called Tech Futures. Look for it. Ed and I are actually the moderators, and if you apply to join, very likely we will accept your application. So please do join the LinkedIn group, and we've got a lively discussion happening there. So try to make Navigator, and if you can't make Navigator, please try to make Tech Futures. Speaking of Navigator, next slide. Here's a photo of the hotel. Isn't that wonderful? It's the Sand Pearl Resort and Spa at Clearwater Beach, Florida. It's actually a really, really cool part of the country. I really love this. It's right on the beach, as you can see. And the emphasis is on making digital transformation real. In other words, what steps you actually have to take now that you've gotten, you and your senior executives and everyone else in the organization has spent a bunch of time learning about digital transformation and what it means. How do you actually make it happen? What are the pitfalls to avoid? What are the processes to put in place? How should you organize your initiative? What skills do you need? All that fun stuff. We will be showcasing the results of the 2nd ever digital transformation benchmark and maturity model, where we capture this information and, more importantly, apply it to the companies that are doing the best jobs at digital transformation, so that we can distill out a roadmap for everyone else to follow, to learn from the experiences of those folks with the highest maturity in digital transformation. So you should definitely come. Here's the information on how to get there. And certainly if you hit our sites and go to the events page, it'll tell you everything you need to know. Okay, enough about what we're doing in this space. Let's get to the stuff that you really joined this webinar for. Next slide, please. Next 2, actually. Yeah. Okay. Here's an example of out of the labs. And one area that we cover is material science. Why do we cover material science? Because I am personally convinced that material science will fundamentally change IoT by embedding intelligence and other capabilities into materials, and thus transforming IoT from where it is today, which is primarily monitoring networks, to actual control networks. And one technology that can potentially help this is self-healing polymers. We'll talk about that in the next slide. Another one is printable storage. So material science is an area that we're going to continue to focus on, bring you the latest and greatest research that's happening in universities and research labs around the country and around the world. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, one of the areas is self-healing polymers. It turns out that this is May, so that would be last month on April 4th, Dr. Chao Wang at UC Irvine announced that they had developed self-healing, highly elastic polymers. And if you're wondering why the photo is the same as previous, that's not a typo. I just thought it was a cool photo to illustrate the concept of material science. You can see when we say highly elastic, that's really freaking elastic there. What's cool about this is this stuff will heal itself. If you slice it, it will heal the cut. It will also respond to electrical signaling, so you can turn it into something like an artificial muscle for robotics. So what would you do with this? Well, the researchers immediately jumped onto the, hey, we can make self-healing cell phone screens. That would rock. It turns out that Dr. Wang has done a ton of research in self-healing batteries, which is also very interesting because batteries can crack and cause all kinds of damage. And more importantly, the fact that you can send electrical signals through this stuff and have it contract and expand means you can build artificial muscles for robots. Very cool stuff. I certainly urge you to look it up and get more information about it. To do that, you can see our blog, which came out the day after they announced their research, and that's something else that, that Out of the Lab will continue to focus on extremely timely research so that you're going to see it first here. So that's April 5th. See that blog. Next slide, please. This is a really cool idea, and I'll show you, the next slide after this will show you exactly how this can get applied. But the concept here is storage that you can print onto items at low cost using commercial inkjet printers. Essentially what they've developed is something that you can just take an off-the-shelf inkjet printer, spray on storage capabilities. Right there, they've got about 4 bits of storage. So it's not terribly exciting at the moment, but they've proven the proof of concept that you can then literally you could embed the storage into the thing that you're looking at, whether it's an apple or a pear or a medical device, and we'll talk about that in just a second. And you can therefore embed information directly into the thing that you're measuring. So for example, if you had a pill box or a container of pills and you wanted to make sure that it had not been exposed to more than a maximum temperature or frozen to more than a minimum temperature, that storage would be embedded directly into the device without requiring power, so that you could then just scan it or upload it when you're near power, and you can read it and see, oh gosh, this has in its entire life never been exposed to outside the range. Another cool thing about this happened at, as you can see, Duke University. The guy that did it is a grad student. He actually has a thesis advisor, but the thesis advisor is extraordinarily humble and has been promoting his grad student rather than himself with this research. So the guy who's really behind it is Matthew Catenacci. I talked to him. I will tell you that Matthew intends to take this research a whole lot further. He's doing a proof of concept for his thesis, but as you can imagine, there are all sorts of commercial applications for this, and we'll show you one in just a second. And he's planning to really delve into the research for those commercial applications as soon as he graduates, which I believe is going to be next year. Again, you can read more about this and the details of how this works on our Nemertes blog on April 14th. Next slide, please. Okay, that's an example of what you're going to be seeing from out of the lab. We have a lot of those, and you will see a whole lot more forthcoming. Let's jump into one of the emerging technologies that has gotten a lot of buzz lately, and we've done a ton of research on, which is Internet of Things. And if you could just leave this slide up for just a second, Karen, because I want to highlight a few things. We have some industry-first research that will be rolling out in a couple of weeks about the state of IoT security in enterprise organizations. Very interesting stuff. We can tell you how to organize to effectively secure IoT. We can talk to you about the tools and products that are out there and aren't out there for securing IoT. So we definitely have a very specific angle on IoT security that we're told is absolutely unique. Nobody else is looking at it the way we're looking at it. But in order to talk about securing IoT, we need to also be covering the solutions that enable IoT, which brings me to next slide, please. Again, hot off the presses, this was just announced a couple of hours ago. The good folks at Honeywell have created something they call Connected Freight. They just issued a press release on it. It's very cool. It's an all-in-one logistics solution for managing high-valuable perishable freight. Hey, wait a minute, wasn't that the example we just talked about a second ago? Indeed. Look at this. What they've done is they've built low-cost sensor tags that you attach to the pallets or the packages, and they will detect things like temperature, vibration, humidity, shock, tilt, pressure, and intrusion if somebody's tampered with it. So again, high-valuable perishable freight, such as, for example, expensive drugs, maybe chemotherapy drugs, maybe immunotherapy drugs. If you're dealing with anyone that has cancer, those are incredibly important, incredibly expensive, and really not very tolerant to changes like this. But the folks at Honeywell don't just do the sensor tags. They also have a mobile gateway that captures this information, transmits it securely, important point on securely, real-time via the cellular network into the cloud. Then they've got a cloud-based dashboard and analytics that you can monitor. You get real-time alerts. You can get real, data stored so that you can do compliance and auditing checks, so you can absolutely validate that your perishable freight has been treated as it needed to. And more importantly, you can get predictive or reactive analysis, i.e. if your freight is on a truck and the truck is heading down the highway, and you know that they're going to be backed up for several hours and your freight is too perishable to sustain those several hours, you can actually instruct the truck driver to go a different route. As I said, they just announced that. Now, if you put two pieces together, you can think to yourself, hey, what those guys are doing at Duke and what the folks at Honeywell are doing could potentially, a year or two out, be actually very, very synergistic. And that's exactly, the connected freight example is exactly a case study of why embedded storage, spray-on storage could be so valuable, because that would actually reduce the cost of all of this even further and slot into a system like the Honeywell system. Next slide, please. Okay, for the next several slides, I'm going to talk about some key trends that we're keeping an eye on, sort of across the board. We're now getting closer and closer. We've gone from out of the lab to kind of Forerunner technologies that are happening today, and now we're looking at some of the implications of what people are doing and some of the things that are happening as people do these, and that'll lead us into the Friday finds, which are cool technologies and cool companies that are actually changing things as we speak in the here and now. And the first example is going to be microservices and containers. Next slide, please. Okay, for those of you who do any flavor of software development, this is actually old hat. It's been around for a couple of years, but it is actually game-changing, and we're doing some very, very interesting research on how it's game-changing inside enterprises. But just for the folks who don't do software development, here is your entire tutorial on containers and microservices in a tiny little slide. Basically, the whole concept, the world used to be back, oh, I don't know what, let's see, 15 years ago, if you wanted to do anything, develop any kind of software, the first thing you'd do is spin up a server and configure it with whatever it needed so that you could begin to develop your software. That was a highly mechanical process, a very prone to error process, and a very slow process. We moved from that to virtual machines. VMware, of course, kind of changed the game in 2004. Everything got very different. The next step beyond virtual machines is containers, which takes a virtual machine and puts it, as the name would imply, in a nice little box with everything it needs to execute. So now it's self-contained and self-sustaining, so you don't have to worry about configuring your virtual servers to support your virtual workloads. You don't have to think in those terms of, let me build the right platform and make sure everything is perfectly correct for this code to execute. Each code is like a turtle. It's basically pulling everything it needs. Each workload is like a turtle. It's pulling everything it needs to execute, and that enables you to develop microservices, which are very small, mobile. They're kind of the great-grandchildren of SOA, if you're familiar with SOA, the idea of service-oriented architecture. The idea is you can place calls to each other and launch a microservice can call another microservice without having to worry about, are they both operating on the same version of the same platform of whatever. Each one has what it needs to execute. What you're seeing is a lot of folks are deploying containers and microservices as a way to develop code in a very fast, reliable, and secure fashion. And most of the major, what we call digital native organizations like Amazon, like Google, like Netflix, have been doing this for several years. The rest of us are just launching this. So next slide, please, to talk a little bit about the state of all this. Container, as I said, the rest of us are just launching this. In our most recent benchmark, we found that only 11% of companies used Docker, which is the preeminent container provider. However, 40% of the highly successful folks, the folks that scored the highest on our cloud and data center maturity model, are using them. We're finalizing that research as we speak for this year, and we anticipate that 40% will probably double. And that 11% may increase, maybe even triples, but the bottom line is highly successful companies are deploying containerization at a much greater rate than the rest of us. How they do that and how they do that effectively is a longer story and sort of beyond the scope of this presentation, but just a heads up that microservices and containers are key. Next slide, please. Again, can we cut to the next one after DevOps? Yep, perfect. So containerization is also a key piece of DevOps, which is a software development methodology. As you can see, once again, highly successful companies are way more likely to adopt DevOps, 75% of them versus 22% generally. Interestingly, and the reason I included this slide, DevOps, of those doing DevOps, around 50 to 60% also use containers. So if you're doing DevOps without containers, one of the key takeaways today is start doing containers. If you're doing containers without DevOps, you probably want to be doing DevOps. Now, the thing about DevOps is you've probably been hearing about it, reading about it, learning about it. There's tons of tools. Everybody starts talking about, Chef and Puppet. These are the core tools that you need that do versioning, that do continuous integration and continuous delivery. But what's really interesting is that there are some adjacent technologies that are as important as those core technologies to making DevOps successful. Next slide, please. So we recently did a series of Friday finds on on some of these core technologies, you'll probably recognize that piece of art, and it's probably making a whole lot more sense all of a sudden, because some of the key areas where you need to be focusing on if you're doing DevOps are things like API management, data analytics, cloud storage, and taking a mobile-first design. And within all of those, the key common theme is automation. So yes, you can manage APIs manually. You can do data analytics to a certain extent manually. Cloud storage, hey, we've got Box and Dropbox. What more do you need? We'll talk about that. And mobile-first design, well, we've been developing mobile apps for several years. What's different? Each of the companies that I'm going to highlight have brought automation to these areas, and they're very interesting because of that. So the first one is Mashape. The reason they exist is because they focus on API management, which sounds like kind of a non-problem. Like, okay, I designed an API. What do I need to manage about it? Well, if you're doing that microservices design that we talked about previously, you probably have multiple APIs, in fact, quite a number of APIs. And first and foremost, if you're an enterprise organization, you have to tell everybody in the organization that the APIs exist. So you need to advertise them and promote them and make it clear what they do. That's kind of helpful too. So other developers can seize on your APIs and accelerate their own development efforts. Once you've got that, you should be tracking the portfolio and either delivering or at least noting when the APIs are updated, another key point there, because APIs do get updated. And also, as the API developer, you probably want to know which ones people are using, because it's kind of a Darwinian world out there. It's kind of a dog-eat-dog world. You want to put most of your development effort into the APIs that people are using the most and retire the ones that nobody's using. And oh, by the way, you might also want to know how well they're performing. Are you delivering against the SLAs you're promising using those APIs? So if you take a couple of minutes and think about it, you realize that API management is now a whole new problem that exists because of DevOps, because of containers, and because of microservices, and it's something that you'll need to focus on. Next slide, please. Moving right along down this, SignalFx is a company that instantiates data analytics in the DevOps space. And as most of us are aware, what DevOps actually does, if it's implemented properly, is move people towards hypothesis-based development. What that means is, instead of arguing about whether a certain feature needs to be implemented a certain way, you implement it, you get it out there, and you see if the results are what you expected. There are lots of great stories about how this works in the real world, but the important point is it moves away from these endless arguments where the highest paid person's opinion usually decides, and moves you into a world in which the actual outcome is what decides. That all sounds great. But how do you make that happen? Well, if you have database design, you need to be monitoring the performance of application services, containers, microservices, and seeing that in real time, because gosh, you know, in a world of continuous integration and continuous delivery, you're elevating code multiple times a day. And just a side note on that. For those of you who are listening and going, yeah, Johna, we're not Amazon over here. You know, we are a staid and boring financial services firm. We don't elevate code multiple times a day. You'd be surprised. I recently, last week, was chairing a panel at the Wall Street Technologies Association, which is a bunch of very staid and established and traditional financial services firms. And just for fun, we asked the audience how often they elevated code. And it was very, very interesting to hear that a good percentage of them did it more than once a day. And I mean, we're talking, you know, boring. And sorry, if you're in an insurance company, I'm not implying that insurance is necessarily boring. So quotes around it, but boring insurance companies and people that you would think never, you know, never take these kinds of risks. So the world is shifting from this whole notion of quarterly updates or annual updates to, you know, continuous delivery and continuous integration. And to do that, you need real-time insight and real-time data. And that's where, you know, that's where data analytics comes in and SignalFx. Next slide, please. Cloud storage. Well, many of you are sitting here going, well, cloud storage is not new, right? We've got Box, we've got Dropbox, we've got, you know, Google. Lots of people will give you cloud storage. However, what you really want to be able to do is not just store things in the cloud, but actually tag them with information that makes those things valuable in your DevOps initiative. So for example, you might have unstructured data files like video and call that an object and have that object be something that a microservice can call. You want to be able to impose relationships and versioning on these objects. Versioning is, of course, key. Many cloud storage providers do some level of versioning. You really want dynamic versioning so that you're able to embed these objects into everything that you're doing in the DevOps world and the app dev world. And that's where companies like Minio show up, because they provide the tools that actually allow you to glue your cloud-based storage together with your DevOps initiative and your container initiative. Last but not least, next slide. Ionic is a company that focuses in mobile application development. And here again, we talked about the value of automation, and I would also say templatization, because what they do is provide a framework, templates, and embedded tooling, so that with embedded test and development, so that you can roll out mobile apps very, very quickly and make this almost seamless. Again, we've been doing mobile application development forever. Most folks have realized that at this point, you don't develop an app without developing the mobile version of the app first. But to do that, that means you have to drastically slash the overhead that goes into traditional app dev and really take a DevOps approach to developing mobile apps. That's where someone like Ionic comes in. So that's that fourth component in what I've been calling the DevOps adjacencies, DevOps and friends. These are tools that you wouldn't necessarily think of at first blush when you're thinking about doing DevOps, but you start to realize, gosh, yeah, I do need API management, I do need analytics, I do need cloud storage, and I do need mobile-first design. Whether it's these vendors or someone else, that's not really the point as much as it is that these are key areas that you're going to have to be focusing on and paying a lot of attention to in the upcoming years. Next slide, please. Last but not least in the Friday finds is a security company that I think is doing stuff in a really cool way. And before we go to the next slide, let me just remind you that all of the Friday finds are literally, these are cool companies because they illustrate an advance over state of the art in a particular area that we consider as important. So kind of the selection criteria for getting there is, you know, it's an area that we think is critical, and we think, and the operative word is we think, this is an advance in the state of the art. That said, what we're not saying is go buy these companies, go buy these products, they're tested, they work, they do what the vendor says they will. No, none of that. That'll happen later as we conduct our benchmark studies and our other studies of actual users. But we just want to draw them to your attention right now so you understand what capabilities are out there, so you're up to speed with what's possible. So with that in mind, next slide, please. So this is Acalvio's Deception 2.0. This is their second version of their product line. I really love this because it combines two capabilities that I think are very, very clever. The first is virtual honeypots, and the second one is adversary analytics. Let me talk about each separately. Honeypots are kind of a tried and true way to go after attackers. If somebody's attacking you, what you want to do is build a whole series of juicy-looking targets and then watch what they do. They're traps. The problem until now has been that honeypots tend to be extremely customized, take a lot of effort to build, take a lot of overhead to maintain, and essentially you're building software infrastructure that isn't functional. All it's designed to do is tempt the hackers. What Acalvio does is automate all that. They create, you know, at the click of a mouse, they create wonderful targets from either off-the-shelf code, like, they do a range of stuff. I want to say Salesforce, Oracle, a whole bunch of, you know, standard issue. I think they do PeopleSoft as well. They have a list on their site, but they can also do customized applications. So if you have a custom app, they can deploy pseudo instances of it that look to the hacker like the real thing. And they're virtual, so they're very lightweight. They don't consume a lot of resources from the infrastructure or from management. So now you've set out all these traps, and you've automated the setting out of the traps. The second piece is the adversary analytics. What they've done is taken a field that I love, that I continue to love, which is behavioral threat analytics, which companies like, you know, Bay Dynamics and GuruCall and others do, and they sort of flipped it on its head. Instead of looking at what legitimate users of your network are doing that might be off, they're actually doing adversary behavior analytics to figure out what is going on with this hacker, where are they coming from, you know, what can we do to protect ourselves better, but they're letting the hacker continue to run relatively safely because they're going after all these honeypots. So they're gathering a huge amount of information that you can then use to implement better security in your environment and to improve your security stance without risk, because you're letting them sort of do stuff with your virtual honeypots. Very, very clever approach, and kind of in the why we say the best defense is a good offense. I like it because it takes the battles to the hackers, really. So definitely a very interesting company. Next slide, please. So getting back to some of the cool areas that we've been looking at, call it get together. Immersive group collaboration is a term we coined because we saw a number of these vendors are trying to really create that virtual reality feeling of collaboration that's above and beyond simple video conferencing. Next slide, please. So what does IGC do and what makes it different? Well, it's persistent, and I want to highlight the persistence. I've made this point, it's very funny. I'm not going to tell you what decade it was because I don't want to admit how old I am. But one of the very, very first things I ever had as a published work was talking about video conferencing and why it wasn't taking off the way it should. I think one of the huge reasons video conferencing has been relatively slow to reach mainstream adoption is, quite frankly, because the model is a phone call. The idea is when I want to call someone, I will call them and also see them. In truth, the way humans interact and collaborate is with persistent presence, the idea that it's constantly on. So for example, I was recently at a VC site, and when you went to go get coffee in their kitchen, they had a video screen on and they were showing their kitchen in San Francisco. Now it was 9 o'clock in the morning New York time, and so there really weren't, I think there were 1 or 2 people very sleepy looking in San Francisco at 6 a.m. San Francisco time. But the point was, that's where a lot of the creative ideas get exchanged, when you're just standing there drinking your coffee and you're talking to your colleagues. So for that, you need persistence. Obviously, it has to be interactive. It's also got to be integrated with all the other information that you want to share. So one of the weaknesses of old school video conferencing is if you just want to pull that file and open it up, there's no easy way to do that. You have to click screens. Okay, now I'm going to show you the PowerPoint or whatever. You just want to be able to reach in the air, have the file appear, and point to the section of the file you were talking about. And it should be contextual. Well, there's a handful of vendors that we'll talk about on the next slide in just a second who do this. But some of the key distinguishing characteristics are things like touch screens, rich content beyond just text, wall, desktop, and your mobile devices are all in sync. You can tie to team, and again, persistence. The session can be resumed. The liveness is there. Now, they do have some impact on your infrastructure, and that's the right-hand column. We're not going to talk about that here. It's more I want to raise the issue of immersive group collaboration. And next slide, please. Talk a little bit about who's doing it and how. I want to highlight the vendors down in the lower left-hand corner. You've got the folks, obviously, Microsoft Surface is a key one. DisplayNote, Newline, Oblong is incredibly cool. They're very high-end, but they give you a sense of what's possible. So if you can get them to give you a demo, please do. Prism is another one. As you can see, probably close to half of folks are evaluating, but less than a quarter are currently using such systems. And a full third of folks really have no plans yet. We expect this to change. This is from last year's data. We expect this to change dramatically over the next 12 months. Some of the use cases are things like product design teams, workspace of the future, software development, and engineering teams. So these are some of the areas that we're looking at. I want to stress that this is not a comprehensive coverage of emerging technologies. This is almost like a grab bag of everything from cool new materials to ways that humans interact and everything in between. As noted, our Forerunner Technologies covers an awful lot of ground, and we're looking at all sorts of interesting things there. Out of the lab, we don't know what we're going to find as we continue to reach out to scientists and researchers, but we'll bring it to you and help you, use it to make decisions. And certainly the, Friday finds, as we talk to interesting emerging vendors, we'll bring them to your attention. And as we learn more about them, we'll give you better guidance on whether they make sense or not. And with that, I think we're done with the content of this part of the webinar, but we have a few more things to say. Next slide. Yes, so if you want more information on all of this, if you're a client, here's the way to reach us, client-services@nemertes.com. Not hard. The number is the same for both clients and vendors, but nobody ever actually calls on the phone. If you're clients and, sorry, non-clients, if you're not a client, we'd certainly invite you to become a client, so please contact our sales team, and we'll tell you how to do that. Again, sales@nemertes.com, same number. Nobody ever calls. Actually, a few people call. But anyway, best way to reach us is email. You can certainly call if you'd like to. Next slide. And next up is my colleague, John Burke, who is going to be sharing the information that we're gathering as we speak from the research study into cloud networking and security. One of the things we're looking at is the true cost of cloud. So as we've documented over the years, over 80% of companies are already in cloud in some way. But as we highlighted with things like DevOps, the challenge with cloud is that although the cost of computing and storage services on cloud and platform services on cloud is generally lower, at least up front, than what you can do yourself, the actual cost of cloud typically exceeds in-house for a lot in a lot of scenarios, partly because of the cost of the adjacencies. So things like security, management, support, monitoring, integration ends up increasing the cost of cloud, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't move to cloud, because the benefits show up in the form of agility and responsiveness, and you want to be able to document that as well. So essentially what we're going to be doing in the true cost of cloud is providing real numbers on what cloud actually costs in a number of configurations. That webinar is Tuesday, June 13th at 2 p.m. Eastern, and will be delivered by John Burke, my colleague, CIO and Principal Research Analyst. You can register on our site. Just go ahead and hit the site, and you can register there. Love to see you on that webinar. And with that, I believe I hand over to you, Karen.
Okay, thank you. The first question that I'm going to ask, I'm also going to answer, which is, will the slides be available that Johna has shared today? And the answer is yes and no. Yes, you'll be able to refer back to the information, but no, not in the form of slides unless you are one of our clients. So if you are a client, please reach out to client-services@nemertes.com, and our team there will be able to get you a copy of this deck. But we also will be sending out to everybody that's attending today a replay link, which will be located on our website most likely by tomorrow. You should receive that email, so you'll be able to view and share the link of this webinar with others. So that's the answer to that question. And the next question, Johna, is how does Nemertes decide which topics to cover in its different areas?
Okay, and Karen, I'm going to add to that. Someone has also put in a separate question that comes into that. I'm shocked that AI and deep learning was not mentioned once. How can that be? Okay, so let me answer those two questions together. The first one is, how do we decide? Basically, this is based on the research that on our ongoing basis. If we're talking to scientists and engineers who are actually doing R&D, we're also talking to end users who tend to be cutting edge. We're also talking to vendors who show us what their product plans are under NDA, and we realize, hey, there is a common theme here that we're going to focus on, which brings me to AI and deep learning. We are, in fact, focusing on it, very, very much so. I didn't highlight it in this presentation for a couple of reasons, but the top reason, to be perfectly honest, is that AI is one of those things, like automation, that cuts across every single technology area. And so what you'll be seeing from us is AI and security, AI and automation, AI and human-machine interaction, AI in IoT, because that's really where you start seeing the cutting-edge capabilities go to works as it is. And just another thing to add for the person who asked the question, I've been covering AI since, well, one of those decades I refused to name when I was in graduate school. It's been an ongoing effort. AI is a lot harder to do effectively than many people realize. I'm pretty familiar with a lot of the algorithms and a lot of the approaches that people are taking, neural networks and all of the others, deep learning, machine learning. I think there are going to be some really big wins over the next couple of years, but I don't think it's going to be as generalized as the current hype cycle has it today. So bottom line, we will be covering it. We will be covering it in specific areas where we think it's going to have the most impact. Stay tuned.
Great, thank you. Okay, so you mentioned these are all coming attractions, but some of these already exist. Please explain.
Okay, I just want to clarify that for all of these, for example, we do have the Friday finds. Nothing's going to change. You can look on our site on Fridays, and if it's been a tough week, you can look on our sites on Mondays. I will admit we sometimes cheat, and when we post a blog post, we make it look like we posted it Friday. But you didn't miss anything. But anyway, it should be up no later than close of business Friday or close of business the following Monday. So just keep an eye on those. Nothing's different about that. Those have been happening. The Out of the Lab currently exists in the form of blog posts. It's actually going to be a separate site on our website, and you'll be able to hit that site and set it up so that it triggers you if anything new gets added, and do things like search by topic. So if you're particularly interested in AI deep learning, you can do that. So that's coming out. Also, I know there's a question. Someone had asked, what's the name of the LinkedIn group? It is, oh gosh, it was Future Tech, I think, or Tech Future. Ooh. Yeah, we will get that to you when we follow up. Just look at me on look me up on LinkedIn and ask me on LinkedIn, and I'll make sure you get joined. I am Johna Till Johnson, and I'm standing there in front of an iceberg at the North Pole wearing a life jacket, so you'll know it's me. I'm the only Johna Till Johnson, and if you're interested, happy to sign you up. Any other questions, Karen?
There was another one that was asking about some of the other topics we're looking at. I know that you mentioned how we decide them, so maybe just following that up with what some of the other topics might be. And then the last question, just to give you both now, a lot of people are looking at futuring, claim to be good at futuring. What is the unique value proposition that Nemertes brings to that?
I think that's a fantastic question, and thank you for asking. I guess anyone can say this, but we're pretty good at it, and we have a pretty good documented track record on this. And I'll illustrate this with a couple things that apply to myself. I actually was one of the first people using the internet in one of those decades that I don't want to mention, but let me just put it this way. It was before Mark Andreessen existed. So, well, he existed, but he hadn't developed the browser. I was already on the internet using chat and doing quite a lot of things, and realized, hey, this is going to be incredibly important. And so it was. Similarly, back in about 1992, I was writing science fiction as a career, and had an idea for a short story, and this is why I'm no longer a science fiction writer as a career. You'll see at the end of this anecdote. I had this idea of somebody who was really upset because he walked into his apartment and he was too poor to read any books, see any movies, or communicate with his friends or do any of that, because everything had moved to in the cloud. Cloud didn't exist in 1992, and the whole concept of books and videos online didn't really exist in 1992. So that was a pretty good call. Here's why I'm not a science fiction writer. I set that story in 2050, 5-0. Big mistake. Obviously, it was well instantiated by 2015. So I'm not that good at calling the future that far out. So we do have a very good documented track record. Erwin Lazar, my colleague in the communications space, has been making accurate calls for how UC will evolve. What is new and different is that we've partnered with Ed Krebs from Ford, who has taken this from kind of a couple folks with a couple of tricks and a pretty good track record to turning that into something that's institutionalizable. And he's done that at Ford. So again, track record, having done it. So that's really our claim to fame. We've done it in the past, and we're working with somebody that has also done it in the past and can also institutionalize it. And with that, I just want to highlight something else. There is a comment that somebody posted early on when I was wishing everybody happy Thursday, good morning, good afternoon. He pointed out that it's Friday in Australia. Duncan, if you're still on, thank you so much for pointing that out, and let us know how tomorrow looks, because I'm always very interested in futuring, and you're ahead of us in Australia, so let us know what life is like tomorrow.
Nicely done. Okay, and with that, we're going to wrap up today's webinar. Thank you all very much for your time and attention today. And as a reminder, please join us for our next webinar on Tuesday, June 13th at 2 p.m. Eastern, The True Costs of Cloud, presented by John Burke. And a registration link will be posted on our website. And when you receive the email with the replay of this webinar, there'll also be included a registration link for the next. So you'll see it there as well. Once again, if you'd like to follow up with us and earn client please send us an email at client-services@nemertes.com. If you are not a client, please send an email to research@nemertes.com or sales@nemertes.com. Thank you all very much, and this concludes the webinar.